Welcome into the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. I'm Chase Goodbread, sports columnist with the Tuscaloosa News. I'm joined by Travis Reier, the longtime senior analyst at BamaOnline.com. You can get the Talkin Tide podcast on Twitter. Our handle there is Talkin_Tide. Give us a follow. You will get links to all of our podcasts as soon as they drop right there. And of course, you can get the podcast wherever you prefer to get them online, Apple Podcasts, and as well, we are live on YouTube and Facebook. Want to thank our sponsor, Peterbrook Chocolatier of Tuscaloosa. More on them a little bit later in the program. An abbreviated podcast for you here on a Wednesday night. Travis, we jump in. Not a lot of big breaking news over the last week or two. I guess you'd expect that at this time of year. But SEC Media Days are upon us. They get going next week. We're going to touch on that a little bit, touch on Tommy Rees as well. We're going to hit that two-deep tumbler before we get out, too. But first, the SEC Media Days, Travis, I believe next Wednesday is when Nick Saban will take the stage. Going to be in Nashville, Music City for a change for SEC Media Days. And, of course, it's going to be Kool-Aid McKinstry, J.C. Latham, and Dallas Turner representing the Crimson Tide. The names for each school's representatives released several days ago. Quickly, Travis, I guess we'll just kind of start with some thoughts on Saban's choices on who to bring here with these three.
I would say the extent of the star power really going into the 2023 season anyway, Chase. You talk about three guys that during this offseason, if you're into the way too early first round mocks for the 2024 NFL draft, those are three guys that have been prominent in those rankings. So, yeah, I would say sensible, maybe the word I would use to describe those choices to make that trip with Nick Saban.
McKinstry, a guy who is being lauded as one of the top cornerbacks in the country for what's probably going to be his final season. No surprise there. Certainly deserved a claim going into his third season in the program, especially with what he was able to do, in my opinion, as a return guy last year. As you recall, he kind of got thrown into the mix as a return guy last year with the injury to JoJo Earl. Had a little bit of a snag early in that role with ball security. But boy, ended up taking care of that problem in pretty short order, making some plays. Apart from what he brings as a corner, who's got the length and the speed to stay with some of the best receivers in the game, what do you think about what that return ability might do for his profile here coming up in 23?
Can't hurt, right? I think, though, with the way he is being regarded as a corner first and foremost, it's not something he needs to maybe help put him over the top. You know, maybe it would have helped Brian Branch more so than a Kool-Aid McKinstry. And we saw Branch last season when given the opportunity. He wasn't bad back there either. But first and foremost, as you know, the value of being a top corner like he is, that goes as a standalone sort of designation for him. It's going to be interesting, though. I mean, because starting with Texas on September the 9th, you're going to have a wide receiver core for the Longhorns that come in there that I don't think are going to be passive in the way of taking its shots at Kool-Aid. Obviously, the preference is going to be maybe you get matchups against Earl Little Jr. if he's the guy at star. Maybe you go against a Terrion Arnold or a Trey Amos or whoever that other corner is opposite of Kool-Aid. But boy, Xavier Worthy and the rest of those guys for Texas with Quinn Ewers pulling the trigger, he's going to get opportunities even with that reputation, I think, Chase.
Yeah, they'll go after him, some of these quarterbacks. I don't think there's any doubt about it. But he's certainly the anchor back there in what is going to be a young secondary overall. He and Malachi Moore by far have the most experience back there, game experience. And so a lot expected from him for sure. As for Nick Saban at Media Days, Travis, really quickly, a couple of the questions, big questions that we know he'll be asked. Certainly he'll be asked about the quarterback situation. I'm sure people will probably try to get under his hood a little bit on the 24 schedule. I doubt he'll want to say much about a schedule that's a year plus away. But beyond that, what are your thoughts on some of the things that the reporters at media days will try to pin him down on?
Well, just another year with new coordinators, right? I know we're going to talk about Tommy Rees, Kevin Steele, that previous experience working with Nick. How does that benefit both of those parties in 2023? So, coaching staff, I would think, would be a part of that. But, other than quarterback, there's still some glaring sort of competitions that are going to be ongoing heading into fall camp, starting with the offensive tackle position opposite J.C. Latham. You're going to have a couple of new full-time starting inside linebackers. Yes, Deontay Lawson has played a good bit of football, especially last season, but you got some key guys stepping away there right up the middle of that defense, really. The safety positions, inside linebacker. It's not just a quarterback thing. I mean, frankly, it kind of surprises me to see people sort of already penciling Alabama into the college football playoff. I think the talent is certainly there. But as far as questions to answer, starting with the quarterback position, plenty for this team going into fall camp.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think the chalk, as they say, for a West favorite in the preseason's got to be LSU, right? I mean, they won the division last year. They're bringing back a quarterback who led that charge. They're bringing back Harold Perkins, who very well might prove to be the DPOY in the league. Does that sound familiar, right?
Right.
Bryce Young, Will Anderson.
Absolutely. And I think that'll be interesting with Dallas in Nashville. Is kind of, you expected Dallas to be more along the lines of the buzz that Harold Perkins is getting going into this season. And it's not Dallas as much. Now, again, I think there's plenty of folks out there that understand the talent he is, hence where we see him in these first round mocks for 2024. But as far as that dynamic edge guy or sort of that versatile all around playmaker at linebacker, it's not Dallas. It's Perkins.
It is. And I think there's a little bit of a parallel to be drawn between the year Perkins had last year and the year Turner had as a freshman in 21. Mm-hmm. I say that because neither one of them made a hell of a lot of noise in the first half of the season, and then they both turned it on, right? And we remember Turner wasn't even on the field a whole lot early in the year in 21. You had the injury to Drew Sanders, and he ends up seeing a lot of action and just had a whale of a second half of the season. Kind of made a name for himself. In 22, it didn't appear to me that Turner took much of a step forward. Wasn't a bad player, but he certainly didn't explode onto the scene either. Whereas Perkins is kind of coming off that year where he lit it up in the second half of the year, and that's when most of the big games get played, certainly postseason included.
No doubt about it. And you were thinking there would be this springboard effect for Dallas Turner going into his sophomore season, coming off the back half of that freshman campaign. And look, there's only so many sacks and quarterback hurries, I guess, that can be had when you're playing opposite of Will Anderson. But certainly more was expected of Dallas Turner in 2022 than the 4 sacks that he produced after 8.5 as a true freshman. So you got to think, coming off a spring in which he sat out, got well, got healthy, you hope anyway, along with Will Anderson moving on to the NFL, it's right in front of Dallas Turner in 2023, and a guy that you can use in a lot of different ways. I would say not exactly the same way you used or tried to use Will at times, especially last season. But you can move Dallas Turner around. You can put him inside some in some different looks, especially in passing situations. He can play the jack. He can play either of those outside linebacker positions. They're pretty much interchangeable, and you can get creative with him.
Let's pan out a little bit before we leave the media days subject, Travis, to the quarterbacks on the overall. only 5 quarterbacks coming to SEC Media Days: KJ Jefferson, Will Rogers, Jaden Daniels, Joe Milton is going to be there. It's you know, you think back to the years where you had, you know, Manziel and McCarron and Aaron Murray all there at SEC Media Days. You want to talk about star power. Some good quarterbacks here, but, you know, with the transient nature of quarterbacks and the portal now, I think to some, and these are good quarterbacks. Daniels is, I think, had a heck of a year. I expect him to have a big year. Rodgers is a record breaker. KJ Jefferson had a big season for Arkansas last year, but Rodgers and Jefferson don't play for programs that anybody expects to win a conference championship. So that takes something off of their profile, no fault of their own. But in terms of name recognition, Travis, I wonder if college football as a whole isn't starting to go through a little bit of what we saw happen to college basketball when the one and done craze kind of ripped the guts out of name recognition in college hoops.
Yeah, you know, especially when you consider the quarterbacks a year ago around the league, right? And so, and I think you touched on it. When Alabama and Georgia are going through quarterback transition, you know, that's when you're typically probably going to have a lineup like this at the quarterback position. Now, you still got some really good competitions going on around the league too. I mean, Auburn's having a competition. You know, I guess Ole Miss to an extent, although you expect Jackson Dart to be the guy once again in 2023. You got Max Johnson still banging around in the SEC, trying to compete with Connor Weigman down there at Texas A&M, who I think Connor Weigman of the quarterbacks who isn't going to be in Nashville this time around, or the SEC Media Days. I think he's the guy that could come off as the guy that we're talking about the most by the end of the season, especially with that wide receiver core and that skill talent in general he's going to have to work with.
Rifle arm on Weigman. There's no doubt. There's pro talent there with him. The velocity gets a big fat check mark with that kid. So be interested to see what kind of year he has as a sophomore in College Station. All right, moving on quickly, Travis. Tommy Rees, his name's been connected to this Northwestern opening. Not necessarily a strong connection, but his name's been kicked around. Obviously, Northwestern has got a hire to make in the aftermath of this Pat Fitzgerald firing, which is a wild story in and of itself, as we know, just awful for sure. But your thoughts on the possibility, quickly, the connection here. He knows Chicago. He played high school ball there, Lake Forest High School. And, of course, he was a GA at Northwestern in 2015. So, you know, he does have those connections, although to me, Travis, I don't see Northwestern going in that direction, only because with the situation that happened there, I think if you're the AD and you're trying to pick the right coach to come behind a mess like that, I think you almost have to go with a guy with head coaching experience, which Rees does not have.
Yeah, and if you're Rees, and we've seen this with previous Alabama coordinators, I mean, there's been some Power 5 jobs that Alabama coordinators just weren't that interested in. And if you're Tommy Rees, do you really want to walk into that situation from his perspective, even if it were made available to you? I hear what you're saying. You would think absolutely you'd want someone with head coaching experience. But I could also make a case for if you could find someone like the Big Ten version of Sam Pittman might be a real unifying sort of guy at a place like Northwestern. I think it's going to take that kind of energy too, that type of persona. You know, Tommy, you said it. I think we're at the connect the dot stage of the coaching search in Evanston. So when you start thinking about connections and ties and previous stints in the program, he checks those boxes. But again, I think you could look at it from both sides of that sort of equation and say, why? why would you go that direction?
Right. All right. The Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. Moving on, want to thank Peterbrook Chocolatier, our fine sponsor. Why don't you tell us a little more about him, Travis?
You know what it is? It's July, right? And you know what today was, or is still, I guess. We still got a little bit of time. It was a Wednesday. So every Wednesday in the month of July, you can go by Peterbrook Chocolatier right there at 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa. Ask for your free scoop of gelato on Wednesdays. Don't go in there on Monday or Thursday and say, I thought about coming Wednesday, couldn't make it. I'd like to defer my free scoop of gelato to Friday. One scoop, please.
Yeah.
No, it's got to be on Wednesdays, but they're going to do it for you. Free scoop of gelato every Wednesday in the month of July at Peterbrook Chocolatier, 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in Tuscaloosa, right there in the Indian Hills section of T-Town.
All right, Peterbrook Chocolatier, get over and check them out for sure. Love that place. Pretty much anytime I go to Southern Ale House for lunch, which is a friend of the program as well, Travis, I pop into Peterbrook. It's a pairing kind of thing, that post lunch walking out of Southern Ale, you got to pop in there and get some kind of chocolate. Peterbrook Chocolatier does a fantastic job. All right, the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. Moving on real quickly, we're going to jump in that Too Deep Tumbler like we've been doing for much of the summer here in a second. But before we do that, really quick, Travis, a quick note on former Alabama running back Mark Ingram. He's moving on from his playing days and has joined Fox Sports. He's going to be part of the team on the Big Noon Kickoff Studio Show on Fox. Ironically enough, a former Heisman Trophy winning New Orleans Saint replacing a former Heisman Trophy winning New Orleans Saint, because Reggie Bush moving out of that role and Mark Ingram going right into that Reggie Bush seat. So there you go. What do you think?
Yeah, we're getting old when these guys we covered 10, 12, 13 years ago are now officially moving on to television or sports media. And Mark will do great. He'll hammer it. He's got the energy. He's got a great understanding of the game, obviously. He keeps it fun but informative. So kind of interesting that, he has to work in a situation where I guess it'll be mostly Big 12 and Big 10, I guess. But good for Mark. It's that entryway into it. I think he did the sideline reporting for the Crimson Tide Sports Network for the Sugar Bowl, to end last season. So he got a little bit of a taste with that too. He's done that before. So good for Mark, man. Got through it, got through football. It looks like in pretty good shape from a health perspective. Go have fun with the broadcasting and keep making those big checks.
Greg McElroy, quarterbacks, that Mark Ingram squad, of course, he's in the media now. You got Mark Ingram. You want to say, is Julio Jones next for the media, Travis? But Julio is not going to take a media job. That's not who he is.
I keep waiting maybe Dante Hightower. I think Dante would be really good, whether it was within the Patriots organization maybe or on a national network doing college. Maybe he doesn't have an interest in it. But I always thought Dante would be a good guy, a good option in that realm too.
Barrett Jones from that era
Barrett's
took a dip in the media, sports media as well. Absolutely. All right, moving on to the Too Deep Tumbler. Before we get out of here, Travis, let's give it a quick spin and see who comes out. Spend a quick minute talking about one or two.
I feel like we're at the Knights of Columbus on like a Tuesday. B17.
Tumbler has a mind of its own. I
17.
Can't get them out of this thing without dropping one. All right, coming out of the Tumbler right now, Travis, we got number 16. That would be veteran kicker Will Reichard.
Oh, speaking of 17s, wow, kind of called that one, yeah.
Yeah, and then wow, back-to-back numbers here, 15 and 16. So with 15, we've got a double jersey there with Ty Simpson and Dallas Turner. And then
okay.
Will Reichert, of course, makes 16. We've already kind of hit on Dallas, so we probably don't need to travel back on his upcoming season. We just talked about it a few minutes ago. But Ty Simpson and Will Reichert. Let's start with Reichert, Travis. This guy should go down already, I think, is one of the best kickers Alabama's ever had. Made a decision to leave Alabama early, enter the draft, accepted a Senior Bowl invitation. Certainly looked like he was long gone at one point.
Out of it and gone.
That's right. Yep. Decides with a change of heart, come back for one more year in 2023. You as a former kicker, you're our special teams expert as a former kicker, Travis. What are your thoughts on Will Reichert's final year?
I think he already is the best to do it at Alabama. And I understand he doesn't have the school record for maybe the longest kick. But, some of those came in an era before kicks, field goals, extra points were off the ground. Remember, you go back pre-1989, I want to say it was. Everything was off the block. You had a 1-inch or a 2-inch block. And it kind of pains me to say that because my favorite Alabama kicker of all time is Van Tiffen. Not even close. That was my formative years kicker pretty much at Alabama. And you talk about the biggest of moments, Van had some of those. So, but Will is, I think he's the all-time leading scorer in UA history. Made some big kicks. I know he had the miss at Tennessee late last season, but Will has even had big kicks in games that Alabama lost that people forget about, like the big one late at LSU last year. What was that, 46, 47 yards in Death Valley? And he drills one very, very late. So, no, he's just been a model of consistency. I don't know if his pro projection is super. I think there's some guys that have come before him that have made it to the league, so I wouldn't rule it out entirely. I just, in terms of range, and firepower, horsepower, that might be a little bit of a concern for him. But man, at this level, and for what Alabama needs this year, breaking a new quarterback, I mean, you might be depending on a kicker more than you have in the last 5 or 6 years to provide big points, because they may not come as easily offensively as they have in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, and they got a big taste last year of coming down to the wire in a lot of games. They played 5 close games last year, Travis. 4 of those 5 pretty much came down to the final play or the final series. So they needed Will Reichert probably more than they ever have last year, and they may need him just as much or more in 2023. All right, real quick before we get out of here, number 15, Ty Simpson, the backup quarterback, competing with Jalen Milroe for that starting position. Neither he nor Milroe lit it up on A-Day, that's for sure. But the competition, I think it's pretty clear, Travis, that it remains wide open, especially with a transfer portal guy coming in and Buckner from Notre Dame. So Simpson's continues to be in a battle that'll carry into fall camp.
Yeah, it's kind of a good news, bad news into spring drills and into the interim month of May, I guess you could say. It was bad news for Ty in that, the decision was made to bring in another quarterback to compete in Tyler Buckner. But it wasn't the worst news, because it meant that, Ty was still in this thing. And I still think, this is a young guy. And so regardless of how it shakes out, he may win the job. But even if he doesn't, there can be some more patience, I would think, exhibited by Ty Simpson based on where he's at in his eligibility clock, as compared to, say, Jalen Milroe, who is another year ahead of him. So that's going to be a fascinating aspect of all this, depending on how it plays out. If Buckner wins the job, all eyes are going to shift to Milroe And Simpson, much like they did when the decision was made to bring in Buckner. And both those guys decided to hang around and compete in the preseason. So I think Simpson has the attributes you need to be a starter in the Southeastern Conference. I think he checks the boxes of the kind of quarterback that Tommy Rees likes, because we talked about, I think the run game is going to be a part of this thing with this quarterback battle too. I think the biggest thing for these three quarterbacks that are considered to be the primary candidates isn't just that you can run, is that you're very willing. You're a very willing participant in the quarterback run game. If you have an attitude of, well, I'll do it because I have to,
right?
None of these guys are good enough passers, I guess is what I'm saying, Chase, to have anything close to an attitude of, and I'm not saying any three of them do, but that's one thing that could be a divider or a separator in all this, is if one of these three guys, like, I'm running it because I got to run it. I'm not running it because I really want to.
Right. And I think the challenge for Simpson is he's competing against the best athlete on the roster for this job, right? And so for me, I don't think it's going to be enough for Ty Simpson to battle Jalen Milroe to a draw in the passing game, because if that's what happens, Milroe is going to be your guy because he's the best athlete they got, in my opinion, on the whole team.
As long as he's good with 10 to 12 design runs a game, there's no question. Yeah, in that scenario, no doubt.
So, that's part of the challenge, I think, for Simpson. But again, if you kind of read between the lines in spring practice, listening to Saban, and sometimes you don't have to read between the lines because Saban's pretty clear about this. The guy who makes better decisions and doesn't turn the ball over as much is going to have the pole position, right? The inside track, I think, to win this job. Clearly, neither Milroe nor Simpson is standing out enough, I don't think, in that way at this point. But if Simpson is able to show to be the best decision maker they've got in fall camp, that's his best path.
Yeah. And I think the attraction to Buckner may have been as much, and again, this is a guy they did not bring in as a camp arm. He's in there to try to win the job, is that while he didn't always execute, I'm sure, the way Tommy Rees would have preferred when you talk about turnovers and ball security, but just within the framework of, okay, this is the way I need the quarterback to play in this offense.
Mm-hmm.
And they probably have watched tape of the Notre Dame offense or Buckner prior to all of this. And now it's, well, he's here. It's not just tape that I'm trying to get across now. This guy's actually here.
Right.
In terms of, again, run pass and those type of things that you're going to have to get out of the quarterback position, because these aren't elite passers. I mean, I think Ty has the most upside maybe of the three, but not by a huge margin. But right now, where they're all at as passers, they're solid to mediocre is what I would say. And again, some of these guys, one or two of these guys, have room for growth. The concern with one or two of them too, though, is how close are they already to their ceiling when it comes to that.
Right. Going to be hearing a lot about those guys and that battle next week at SEC Media Days. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. I always say we're going to run short when we run short, and then we end up a regular length podcast. Here we are sitting at 29 minutes, Travis. So much for a short one. But at any rate, it's been a lot of fun, as it always is. We will not do a podcast this coming Sunday, but maybe look for one midweek next week, maybe Wednesday, Thursday. We recap Alabama's day at SEC Media Days. That's your programming note, and that's going to do it for us. So for Travis Reier of BamaOnline.com, I'm Chase Goodbread, sports columnist with the Tuscaloosa News, and we'll talk to you next time right here on Talkin Tide.